Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, both of those of you who are online and for those of you in the audience. Welcome to our 7th Brain Club session, being broadcast out of San Francisco. I would love to say beautiful downtown San Francisco, but it's been over hot today. Just a quick reminder of what the Brain Club is about. We're interested in what works. And our second tagline is serious fun. So what works, and let's take a serious look, but let's have some fun doing it. So our process, for those of you who are new, and I see quite a lot of new faces in the audience today, we take a topic and we focus on it, just one topic for the month. We have an audience here, a large audience here in My Brain Solutions headquarters, and a growing audience online. So just as a quick reminder, for those of you online, if you have questions during the presentation, then please send them in via the chat room, and they'll get translated and they will get answered. For those of you in the audience, on your seats you should have found some My Brain Solutions stickers. Write your questions on that, and again, we'll collect the questions. And so we'll be firing questions later on. And this month's topic is about stress. And so if you take the concept of serious fun, then stress is one of the topics that goes down into the deep levels of seriousness. We're just really starting to learn about some of the importance of stress. And we're starting to understand some of the impact of the non-conscious biases that tend to hijack us. And so one of those is stress. That's what today is about. And my colleague here on my right, Savannah, will introduce our speaker.
Great. Thank you, Phil. It's really a pleasure of mine to be able to introduce today Dr. Heidi Hannah, a good friend of mine, and as well as our community here at Brain Resource. Heidi has an educational background, bachelor's in communications, as well as a master's in mental health and a PhD in holistic nutrition. So she may not call herself an integrative neuroscientist, but as a global speaker and as a consultant who's trained thousands of people and individuals in practical ways to improve their brain health in ways that incorporate both the physical health and the mind, we would definitely call her that. Heidi's a New York Times bestselling author and has wrote extensively on both the emotional and cognitive aspects of the brain. She's here today to talk specifically about stress, which is something ubiquitous that of course affects us all, and is something she explores in depth in her latest book, Stressaholic. So to set the stage for her, I'm going to start off with some questions for Heidi. I'm going to ask her to identify which of the following statements is not true about herself. A, Heidi can pitch a softball at 75 miles per hour. B, Heidi once was a Disney character in Disneyland. Or C, Heidi loves public speaking. With that, Heidi Hannah.
Dun, dun, dun. The audience is riveted right now. If you could only see them, they're on the edge of their seats. Well, I'd like to see a show of hands of what everyone thinks, but since I can't see all of you watching via broadcast, I will just let you know the answer is definitely not the last one about public speaking. And I talk about that in my book, which is part of the reason I decided to write the book, Stressaholic. Now, I should probably also add that I can no longer pitch a softball 75 miles an hour, so that should have been could, not can.
You never know.
Yeah, we'll hope that could happen. But it is interesting to share with people that I had a huge fear of public speaking and flying, and now that is actually what I've been doing for the last 10 years. And it's part of the reason I decided to write the book Stressaholic. There's nothing better to do if you really are addicted to stress than write a book about stress. So it was kind of like I was getting my rush or getting my fix from stress once I realized that stress was actually something that could be neurochemically addictive. So I started diving into the research about that. I love the term you used, by the way, integrative neuroscientist. I can add that to the list of things on my bio. Thank you so much.
We've dubbed you.
You have dubbed me, and I will credit you for that. Thank you. But I love this topic of of stress. It sounds funny to say that I love stress, but I really do love stress. And I love the idea of taking a serious approach to this, but also having fun. Because the number one way to really change our relationship with stress is to actually have fun with it and be able to see the lighter side of things. In fact, I joined a group called the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor because I knew I needed to laugh more. And being the nerd that I am, I decided to look for a group that researched humor instead of just going to a stand-up show. And what I've learned is that really humor and play and laughter is a great way to manage stress and change the way that the brain perceives stress, because really that's what this is all about, is not just the stress that we think is outside in the world around us, but our individual relationship with how we perceive the things that we pay attention to. So that's what I wanted to talk about tonight, is really looking at what stress is, looking at our relationship with stress, why stress actually becomes addictive, and how we can change that relationship with some really simple tools. And I decided to actually add a few things from my brain solutions, some tools that I've personally used and used with my clients that have been effective to do that. So, sound good? That's where we're going.
Sounds great.
Okay, we're on track. No stress. So I always love starting with this idea of what is stress. We all have a different idea of what stress is. And unfortunately, a lot of people think that stress is something that is bad. And we're seeing more and more in the research that stress is actually very helpful and can be beneficial depending on how we deal with stress. So we may think of things like getting married. And I love to ask married people if this is a stressful situation. Not only getting married, but staying married can cause a lot of stress and a lot of joy, of course. A family vacation, there's certainly some stress involved in that. And even winning the lottery. I thought it was amazing to look at the research about lottery winners and find out that they're actually less happy after winning the lottery than they were beforehand. And I know a lot of you are thinking that cannot be possible. But unfortunately, what we do a lot of times is we build our happiness into these external events. And once we actually accomplish those things, we realize that that didn't make us happy. And there's nothing more depressing than realizing that what we thought was going to make us happy didn't. The same can be said for things like fame, working with professional athletes who get to a certain level, and they think at that level they're going to be happy. Entrepreneurs and executives face the same thing. So it's not really necessarily what's happening to us, but our perception, our brain's interpretation of what's going on. So all of these things are actually stressful. And by the way, I don't mean in a negative way. The true definition of stress is really anything that causes change or any stimulus for change. Hans Selye kind of used stress for the first time, the way we use it today, as being an adaptation process. And so if something nudges us in a direction that's outside of the norm, that would be considered stressful, whether that's a good stress or a bad stress. But we tend to think of this as the well-known fight or flight response. And certainly that is a stress response, but it's not the only stress response. One of my favorite things to look at is the different types of stress responses that we're now seeing. And Barbara Fredrickson does a great job talking about a totally different type of stress response she calls tend and befriend. And it's actually tends to be more of a feminine stress response, that women, when we're experiencing stressful situations, our first response is actually to try to tend to others and befriend others and build a sense of community around us. And this is really important for both men and women to keep in mind, because if we just treat stress as a one-size-fits-all situation, then we try to give it a one-size-fits-all solution, and that's just not the case. So being aware of that for women in particular, it's important because a lot of times they end up trying to take care of everybody else around them as their energy levels go down further and further and further, triggering an actual fight or flight response in their physical system. So it's important, I think, when we look at stress, to think about it, how it impacts us physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually in all of those different ways. Another interesting thing about stress is that there's very different types of stress based on the length of time. So acute stress, if something were to happen right now in this building and we had to run out the door, we would experience a surge of adrenaline that would help us to actually be able to run away from the situation. And this has a very short lifespan in the body, so it's not harmful. It's kind of like a big peak of energy, and then it just goes back down. We go back to homeostasis. The really dangerous type of stress is the type that most of us deal with on a daily basis. It's that chronic, nagging, underlying, everyday, I just don't have the energy to deal with all of the things that are on my plate right now. That actually triggers a very different stress response, the chronic response, which is more inflammatory in nature. We see more of a cortisol production here, which we know is linked to really all of the major diseases. In fact, I'm a fellow with the American Institute of Stress, and we've identified that 75 to 90% of all medical visits are stress related. Now again, that stress that we're looking at is the chronic, nagging, underlying stress. It's not the things we deal with where we really have to protect ourselves, but that feeling of overwhelm or that feeling that there's not enough time to get things done in the day, which unfortunately most of us wake up and instantly start to sense. So this is the dangerous type of stress, and this is what we want to be thinking about when we look at how do we rewire the way that the brain operates to perceive things in our life as being challenging and not actually being a threat. That will actually shift the stress response from one that's chronic in nature to one that's more acute. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about that in a minute. Another really important point I want to make is that stress is good. Now, I'm not saying go seek out stress in every way you possibly can. Trust me, there is enough of it out there for all of us. But think about the things that are stressful in your life. If you think about the times in your life where you grew the most, learned the most, maybe proved the most to yourself about how much you could tolerate, they were very stressful. Flu shots are stressful, exercise is stressful, and yet those things are intentionally done to cause an adaptation response. So when we actually seek out good stress that challenges us, that's when we see the most growth happen. The biggest factor that most people miss out on in seeing the benefits of this stress, though, is recovery. Because you cannot actually have that adaptation process. You cannot repair the damage that's being done unless you're strategically recovering your energy in an equal way. So everything about the human system is actually supposed to oscillate. It's supposed to have ups and downs. And yet, I've been saying for a long time, most of my clients flatline. They get up in the morning and they go and go and go and go and push and push and push, and then can't figure out why they have a hard time falling asleep at night. So if you've ever felt tired and wired at the same time, you know what I'm talking about. Physically exhausted, but mentally stimulated, almost overwhelmingly stimulated. You can't get your mind to shut down, yet your body is craving sleep. And that's what happens when we become dependent on stress hormones to give us the energy that we need. So again, some stress is good and we want to seek that out, but we have to have adequate recovery and recharge time to get the energy back into our system to actually adapt. So I talk about stress as a relationship. I told you we're going to have fun with this. This is unfortunately the way a lot of people feel. They're getting frustrated. There's too many demands on their plate at any given time. And when I talk to people about eating right or exercising, I always get the same excuse or the same story. Oh, I'll get to that as soon as this happens. It's what I call as soon as syndrome, and many people have that. As soon as work slows down, as soon as I get some sleep, as soon as the kids are out of the house. But the reality is life never slows down to give us a chance to recover our energy. And unfortunately, my guess is most of you have had an experience with somebody in your life where you've seen this happen and have very negative consequences. Phil and I were talking about that earlier. I lost a friend earlier this year, and I've dedicated a lot of my work to trying to teach people how important recovery really is. Because the more positive things are going on in your life and you feel really grateful about all of that, that is a wonderful situation. But if you're not recharging your energy, all of that great opportunity, all of those exciting things going on still require energy. So you can find yourself actually depleted and exhausted and burn out, even doing things you love. And I saw that happen with a friend of mine. So I think it's really important to be thinking about that. What is your personal relationship with stress? I know that sounds really bizarre, but we all have a relationship with how we approach stress. Now, when I talk about stress as an addiction, we do have some very good research. The American Institute of Stress has these publications on our website, which is stress.org, talking about biochemically, biophysically, what's happening in the brain when we're exposed to chronic stress. But I look at it a little bit differently. I'll let the neuroscientists deal with the technical parts. I want to look at psychologically why we get drawn into stress and stay hooked on stress. And that's what I talk about in the book. So to me, there's really 3 reasons we become addicted to stress. It's stimulation, distraction, and validation. So we get stimulation from stress when we're tired. And I'd ask you to raise your hand if you feel tired, but I know many of you will be too tired to raise your hand. It's the end of the day. So you can just nod if you feel like you wish you had more energy in the day to get things done. We rely on coffee and 5-hour energy drinks and stress, honestly, because stress hormones will give us a surge of energy to get things done. The challenge is it also causes a neurochemical dependence on that. When you start to come off of stress, it feels really uncomfortable. That was my big aha before I wrote the book. I was sitting in a hot tub up in where was I? Sonoma or some beautiful place at this inn in wine country. And I was so excited to take a day off. And I had always built a day off onto work, as I'm sure many of you do. I happened to be there, so I'll just take a day for vacation. And that's the only vacation you take all year. By the way, that doesn't count as a vacation, if any of you are wondering. But I'm sitting in this hot tub thinking, this is awful. You know, I closed my eyes and 30 seconds later, I couldn't stand it. It was not fun. It was not relaxing. I wanted to get back to work because there's something really exciting about staying connected and about the adventure of work. And yet relaxing, as those stress hormones come down, it's almost like going off of sugar or any other drug. It can actually feel really uncomfortable. So for a lot of people, they just go right back to the excitement and the adventure of stress. Now, again, I'm saying stress is good, so there's nothing wrong with that if you're building an adequate recovery. But how do you know if you're getting adequate recovery? I would say to most people, you know you're a stress addict if you close your eyes and within a minute of trying to relax, you find it excruciatingly uncomfortable. And a lot of people just thinking about that makes them uncomfortable. So that's that dependence on stress for stimulation. The other 2 I'll just touch on briefly, distraction. So dealing with stress is actually a lot easier than dealing with feeling lonely or bored. And it's also great for validating us. I remember driving one time and checking email at a stoplight, which I will never, ever do again. But I did it this one time. I had probably been on the road for 20 minutes, and I looked at my email and I had no emails. And I think I started to cry a little bit. I couldn't believe no one needed me in 20 minutes. I know that sounds really pathetic, but there's something odd about not being needed, not being connected, you know? And so a lot of times I find people, they'll ask me about social media. I think social media is fantastic if it's used intentionally. But when we use it to quote unquote kill time because we have nothing else to do, think about what we're saying. We're overstimulating ourselves and we're killing time, yet we're saying we don't have enough time to get things done. So I think a lot of it is being intentional about the stress, being intentional about the recovery, and not relying on it for stimulation, distraction, and validation. So I came up with a pyramid, and I'm sorry to throw another pyramid at all of you because there's so many pyramids out there, and I really tried to stay away from it. But the more I kept coming back to this kind of 5-step solution, the more I realized it had to be a pyramid because they build upon each other. And in fact, it looks like a collapsible pyramid. I don't know if any of you had those little cups when you were a kid that opened up that I just thought was the coolest thing, and now I look back and think, you know, that was pretty simple. But we didn't all have computers and cell phones back then. So it's a collapsible pyramid. And the reason I say that is because if you're not doing one of the fundamental steps, you can find yourself actually needing to go back to the beginning again. And so I did this intentionally, starting with rest and then repair and then rebuilding, then rethink and redesign. And so it's intentionally a way of training yourself to better manage stress from the inside out. So I'm going to touch quickly on each of these. The first one seems really simple, but it's probably one of the hardest to do, and that is actually getting adequate rest. So this is not just sleep, which we know we need about 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night, but also rest during the day, being able to actually work for 50 minutes or 55 minutes and taking a 5 to 10 minute mental break. You know, rest isn't just about the body taking a break, it's about the brain taking a break. And we don't typically build that into our schedules. We can perform at higher levels and sustain that by oscillating, building in these short periods of rest. So again, rest for the body and rest for the mind. The second thing is repair. So in my, what do we call it, integrative neuroscientist practice, I look at the mind-body connection. So looking at nutrition, physical activity, relaxation, sleep, and social connections. It's what I call the Synergy Fab Five. And by the way, all of this is on my website. It's in the book. Happy to provide more resources where you need it. But repairing the damage that's been done. We know that stress causes damage. We know that being alive causes metabolic damage, free radicals in the system that are just naturally a part of being alive. So we want to do the best we can to repair that damage by getting the nutrients we need, by getting oxygen to the brain through moving more often, and not even just exercise, but gentle movement, stretching. We were talking last night about Qigong and different exercises that will really help with that circulation process, getting glucose and oxygen to the brain. Relaxation, obviously, I'll touch a little bit more on that. Sleep, I've mentioned, and social connections, which we know are fantastic for the brain. I was shocked when I saw a study that said that feeling isolated is actually worse for your health than smoking cigarettes. And I can send you that study because I remember seeing it and thinking, this is really amazing. But from the brain's perspective, there's not much that's more stressful than being alone if there truly is a threat to your system. So we need each other. And I love the Brain Club and ideas like that to get people to gather and have conversations and really build a tighter sense of community, which we can do virtually. We also need to do some of that in person as well. So the third step is rebuild, and I mentioned stress is good. Well, stress is good when we have the rest and repair that we need. So we can actually seek out ways of stressing our system to become stronger. But we really need to make sure those first two fundamental steps are done. This is part of what I call the recharge process. And I'm writing a book right now called Recharge, which is all about the simple strategy of balancing brain health, balancing brain chemistry, building brain health, and boosting brain power. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. This rebuilding process can happen both cognitively and physically. So this would be interval training for the body, pushing yourself to higher and higher levels, building an adequate recovery. So interval training is really simple, but it allows you to push further than you could before and then get active recovery at a lower level to then be able to go further again. Similar to what I was saying with the executive, you can't sustain high levels over long periods of time, but you can push yourself harder for a shorter period as long as you have that recovery. And same with mentally challenging yourself, doing strategic cognitive exercises, doing brain games, taking different assessments. We know that those things shouldn't be done continually, but we have a short burst of that. We have some challenge, which initiates the growth, and then we allow ourselves to repair that. Rethink. This is a special picture I actually just changed in my presentation because it reminds me of where I was. I was actually on a plane on 9/11, and I had a fear of flying already. That certainly did not help things. I got stuck in Chicago for a week, and thinking about going through a stressful situation like that, we can kind of become hardwired. We can have a, post-traumatic stress situation. But you can also look at situations like that and see positive that comes out of it. I remember the challenge of being alone going through that, and then I remember the community that happened in my hotel in Chicago with a bunch of strangers who were all taking care of each other. It was the nicest I've ever seen Americans treat each other in my entire life was during that time frame. We really gathered together and supported each other. We don't want to go through that stress and that trauma to get there, but sometimes in those moments of the darkest situations, that's when we can really shine. So I always tell people, when you're really going through something traumatic or stressful, think about how you can rethink the lesson that's being learned, the challenges that you're being given. And if you can see it as an opportunity to shine, you will actually benefit from the stress rather than letting it break you down. So that's one I definitely like. And the last one is redesign. And I love this. This is the actual mental training aspect or even physical training aspect of hardwiring different pathways. This is how we create habits. And I simplify this by looking at creating roads and how the roads are more difficult when we first start. But by adding the right nutrients, we create more solid roads. We create a new automatic highway, a new automatic pilot, where we're starting to get pulled into doing the things that are going to be helpful instead of having to push ourselves. And this is what I love about actual brain training and some of the tools that are available to us now, where we can start to hardwire those different patterns of thought and behavior. So that's redesigning our relationship with stress. So I wanted to just run through quickly, and again, I just wanted to do this on my own. I wasn't asked to do this, but I really like the My Brain Solutions tools that are available. I've used them myself. I've used them with my clients. And this, again, is that recharge process. So the first thing I look at is how do we calm the brain? So I look at balancing brain chemistry through strategic relaxation, strategic disengagement. So different tools like the relaxation room, my Calm Beat, which are available. Looking at building brain health. So here, looking for things that are going to help us to have more gratitude in our life, more positivity. You know, we have enough of the negative. From the second we get up and look at the newspaper, turn on the TV, look at social media, we are bombarded with negative messages. So we actually have to seek out the positive so that we can balance the brain chemistry, create a relaxation response, not just the stress response, and then build those connections by firing positive endorphins in the brain. So we've got a gratitude exercise, and one of my favorites, I have to say, it's very simple, but popping the bubbles. It's also a good stress reliever. If you ever see me in the airport and it looks like I'm punching my phone, I'm popping the positive emotion bubbles. It's really fun. Makes people wonder about you too, which is also fun. And the last thing is boosting brain power. So how do we really target? How do we get more specific? Now with this, I think about things like meditation, which is relaxing, but we can also use a targeted meditation to move us in the direction we want. So positive affirmations, journaling, these are great ways to really make sure that we're aligned with the things that matter most to us, which is going to improve our ability to have sustainable high performance, be more resilient to stress, and actually have stress help us as opposed to break us down. And the last thing I'm going to mention before we take some questions is just additional resources. So I have my personal email address, and I'm the only one that checks it. It doesn't go through a bunch of people to get to me. So if you have questions or comments or want me to check out something for you, I'm happy to do that. My website is there as well. A couple of books I've done, The Sharp Solution, which is really about brain health and brain training, came out last year. This year was Stressaholic, looking at stress, addiction, and how to build resilience. And then the one I'm working on now, which is also the one I need the most. It's kind of ironic how that happens. We teach what we most need to learn, and that is recharge. How do we invest in our most valuable resource, which I really believe is ourself and our personal energy? And I'm meeting more and more people who are burning out and breaking down and really need to learn how to recharge so that they can be more effective at helping all of the other people in their life. So that's all I've got. Well, it's not all I've got, but all I've got for now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Heidi. I think everyone can resonate with this in some way, and I just appreciate you making these strategies so practical, because I think stress is often talked about so conceptually and as such a massive problem, yet no one really knows the tiny, simple steps that can be taken to actually change it and make a difference. So thank you. Thanks. Just a few questions, and I know we have some from the audience as well that will be collected for us, but I'm just going to kickstart. You didn't talk too much about this, but I know that there is a very significant relationship between emotional stress, emotional processes in the brain, and our cognitive processes. So how we pay attention, what we tend to pay attention to, our ability to focus, our ability to multitask. So can you speak a little bit about the interplay there and how that ties into some of the things you're saying?
Yeah, that's great. And thank you for allowing me to talk about one of my favorite things, which is the monkey brain. So this is how I keep it simple and playful. This is serious fun in action here. I heard not too long ago about the tertiary brain, and it was like the most simple concept, but yet it really opens my mind up to how the brain, works as this integrated system. So thinking about the hand model of the brain, and I know for many of you this is so common sense, but for a lot of you this might be new, but that we have this reptilian brain that is like the brain stem, the cerebellum area, and I've heard it represented as being like your wrist, the base of your hand, and then the amygdala, the central kind of monkey brain, more emotional, and again, I'm not being super scientific here, but keeping it simple so that you can relate to this when you're in a situation and this happens. brains. So we've got the lizard brain, the monkey brain, and the human brain, the cortex that's really doing the more logical judgment, processing. And what happens a lot of times with emotional stress is that that central part, the monkey brain, gets triggered. And the reason I like the hand model is because I will actually do this as a reminder to myself that I'm acting out of my monkey brain. Yes, so if you see me doing this at the airport, you'll know what I'm dealing with. Now, I also happen to have a monkey here, so thank you for letting me mention that. And the reason is because when we are doing things like public speaking or flying or other situations that might be stressful, or we're worried about judgment of people in the audience who look like maybe they're bored or they've had a long day and they want to leave, that can trigger that, what we call amygdala hijack. And unfortunately, we don't think logically. It can disrupt our ability to actually speak about things on a more human level. So I'll jokingly say, if you're talking to someone and they start multitasking, for example, to remind them that you would like for them to act a little bit more like a human and less like a monkey. But unfortunately, that's what happens. It can work both ways. The over-analyzing, the multitasking can trigger that monkey brain response because it is really a threat to the system anytime the brain perceives that there's not enough energy. So if you feel like there's not enough time to get things done or not enough resources, you are going to be reacting more emotionally and less logically.
Can I take the next one? Because
No, I don't know. Yes.
So one's a relevant one that just came from the audience, which is, I'll start off with exactly how it's written. It says, "You're a great public speaker." But do you have suggestions for how to go from having a fear of public speaking to being a clear, engaging public speaker?
First of all, can I keep that? Thank you. So honestly, a couple of things I'll tell you. There's a lot of tips that I've used, not because anyone's taught me, just because I needed them to get through. This monkey I actually have on the podium with me every time I speak. One time I thought I left it behind and I freaked out a little bit. And I did that because I was having severe panic attacks. Never speaking, well, actually it did happen once while I was speaking, but usually not speaking. What happens with panic disorder is that a lot of times it's the fear of the fear. It's not really the situation. So it's a fear of having a panic attack. And so for me, humor really helps, having some sort of cue to the brain that reminds you to have fun, to think more positive. I actually travel with a bright yellow folder, I call it my sunshine folder, and I keep things in it that I will actually read ahead of time. Letters from clients, thank you cards from people, inspirational things. I will flood my brain with as much positivity to try to balance out the potential negative bias that can happen when I start scanning the audience and overanalyzing everybody's reactions. So I think coming up with some sort of ritual, cue, doing deep breathing obviously can help. I also use music, so I have a song that I listen to that either makes me laugh or inspires me to keep doing what I'm doing, and connecting to a bigger sense of purpose. I believe that what I'm doing is actually making a difference. I would not come up here and do public speaking if it was about making money. It just wouldn't be enough for me to undergo the stress, but when I feel like it's making a difference and I see nice comments like this, it makes me want to keep pushing through it. Now that said, it also means you need higher levels of recovery. If you are going to live a more stress-filled life because you want to be on the edge and you want to be making a difference, you have to be more careful to eat right, get physical activity, get sleep, and take care of yourself so that you're not burning out.
This may be I don't know if this will be hard or easy. We're not just saying it. We're not just saying it. I love some of the things that you spoke to today, like really resonate with me about things that I'm passionate about. And particularly you're touching on reframing stress as something that can be good for us. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of great literature in the field of post-traumatic growth, mm-hmm. and looking at individuals that go through stressors. Only a small percentage of them will develop the PTSD, mm-hmm. And many of them actually are functionally better off as a result of the stress. And I'm just curious, how do you envision the future? Mm-hmm. So people go and they implement some of we change in our approach to stress, and we start to seek it as, or understand it as a positive, mm-hmm. thing, or potentially as a positive, mm-hmm. thing. I mean, there's a spectrum, right? I'm envisioning, counselors would become different. Seeking out counseling would be less stigmatized. Maybe they're seen as going to the gym as opposed to, going out and seeking help per se. But I'm just curious how you see the future of maybe the mental health system, but just describe society. How when we're all doing this differently, like what does the future look like to you?
Well, I'm going to stick with that as it relates to my topic and not what the future is going to look like, because that's terrifying to me. But I will say that when it comes to stress management and building resilience, I feel very strongly that we need to become proactive. And so looking at an example of the military. So I'm very passionate, the American Institute of Stress is very passionate about providing services to the military. And we cannot be reactive when it comes to stress. We can't wait for somebody to have a problem and then try to fix it. We need to train them ahead of time before they go into service to understand how to build their stress reserve. I mean, I would think of it kind of like cognitive reserve, right? If we believe that we can grow our capacity when it comes to the brain to be more focused or more productive, I think we can also build its capacity to be more resilient before the stress hits. When we really get into trouble is when we're so worn down that we're actually burnt out, we're running on empty, and then the stress happens. The brain is going to perceive the situation and say, do I have enough energy to deal with this challenge? If I don't, now we're in a true fight or flight situation. We are in a threat. So here's an example, again, to go back to kind of basic physical energy. If you're not eating every 3 to 4 hours, if you're not moving regularly, and your brain is in an energy-deprived state, and an emotional stressor hits, you respond to that in survival mode. You respond to that totally differently than you might if you took a step back because your brain was in a more optimistic state. So I think we can actually train people proactively to build their kind of stress reserve, for lack of better words, and then be more resilient out in life in general. Same with overstimulation, with information overload. We are bombarded with information way more than our brain can handle at any given time. And so we can train ourselves to slow that down and prepare ourselves before we hit the point of information overload. And I think it's a more protective way of doing it. And my hope would be, like you said, seeking counseling to build up our resilience as opposed to always seeking counseling to try to heal something that's been broken.
So we'll be adding emotional training to our daily lives.
Yes.
Yeah.
And humor.
Yeah.
Love the humor. So a very quick question here, and that is, and I'm going to expand the question slightly, and that is, could you compare and contrast stress and anxiety?
Such a great question. So I believe that stress is the stimulus for change. Anxiety is how we feel about it. So anxiety is a cognitive process that's happening when we're worrying about something. The stress itself is not necessarily anxiety producing, but it can be. So I think it's changing. Unfortunately, what happened is that stress became a catch-all for everything. Stress, in addition to being itself, is also the cause of itself and the result of itself. So think about that for a second. We use the same word for something that is the cause of itself and the result of itself and itself. That doesn't make any sense. It's kind of like how we use the word love sometimes. It doesn't make sense. So when Hans Selye originally put it out, there was distress, there was eustress, there was different terms, and now it's just stress. I feel stressed, and so the anxiety is stress. The anxiety is not stress. The stress is the stimulus for change. It's what's happening that may push you out of balance. That can cause anxiety if you feel like you don't have the energy you need to adapt to that. But it can also create excitement and wonder and curiosity. If the stress is a challenge, then it totally changes what happens to us, physically and emotionally and even spiritually as a result of that. So that's the way I look at it. I see anxiety as a reaction to the stimulus for change if we don't feel like we're prepared to handle it.
I love that one. If we could end on that, that'd be awesome. No, there's more. I see there's more. Go ahead, Phil.
Well, one of the things you talked about was about spirituality. So I'm going to change this question very slightly to go back and says, how do you think spiritual practices fit into your pyramid?
So I think that I use a model, a peak performance model that I learned from the Human Performance Institute, which looked at energy management as being holistic and really comprising of 4 different elements. So physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And that pyramid also builds from the bottom up. When we talk about spiritual energy, I always make sure that people understand I don't necessarily mean religion. That spiritual energy really comes from our values, our beliefs, our core. It can be religious, but it doesn't have to be. But it's really what drives us, what makes us get up in the morning and makes us feel alive. And that changes everything about the stress response. If we're able to connect spiritually to something that's going on in our life, it lessens the impact of the stress from the perspective of it gives us a broader lens, I guess, through which to look at the experience. So by practicing things that really fill us spiritually and that spiritual energy, our sense of purpose, our sense of connection, it's really adding to that resilience reserve. I'm going to have to come up with a better term because I don't know what to call that, but it really is like investing pennies in a bank that when the stress hits, we're going to have more resources, more funds really to kind of fuel whatever it is that we have to do. So I think that's very different for everybody what the spiritual practice looks like, but it's something that I actually incorporate into working with professional athletes or even business professionals is what drives you at your core, what matters most to you, and how do we tap into that? As you mentioned, I like to keep things really simple and practical. How do you tap into that on a daily basis? Whether it's a screensaver, the back of my cell phone is the logo of a nonprofit that I started. Every time I pick up my phone, I'm reminded of something that's bigger than myself and something that means something to me. And actually that helps if there's a stressful phone call to feel a little bit more resilient because I know that life is bigger than just that one stressful phone call. So I definitely think spiritual practices can really help build resilience.
We'll take 2 more questions, I think. I'll take one and then... So you talked a lot about rebuilding. And it says, so how do you take that to a personalized rebuilding process? Are there different strategies that might be for personal use rather than general strategies that you've talked about?
Yeah, so with the rebuild phase, I look at all of those different factors. And with my background in holistic nutrition, I really focus a lot on nutrition because I do think that we can decrease inflammation. So when I look at diet, for example, I'm looking at something that would be anti-inflammatory that's going to help to reduce the internal stress. Stress is not just what's happening outside us, it's also what we're doing to ourselves. We eat a lot of foods and drink a lot of substances that actually stress us out and decrease our resilience. So fortunately, we can now become very specific in our recommendations for nutrition by looking at different types of functional medicine assessments, for example, looking at allergy or intolerance profiles for each individual. So as kind of a general rule of thumb, I would say eat a diet that's anti-inflammatory, eat foods that are natural, something your grandparents' would recognize as food, to quote Michael Pollan. I love his work. Eat more plants, all of these common sense things that we know we should be doing, and eat less of the things that are going to cause extra stress. Now, for the individual's perspective, most people know their body way better than I know their body. So I'll usually ask them, what do you think stresses out your system? What do you not feel well after you eat it? And if you're not sure, there's a few foods we can just eliminate for a couple of weeks, a basic elimination diet to get your system to reboot, reset, and then as you add those foods back in, it'll become pretty clear to you what your body doesn't tolerate well. So I think what's exciting about right now is with nutrigenomics, we can actually start to fine-tune our recommendations, and same with exercise. It's pretty much common sense. Doing things like interval training, strength training, flexibility training are important, but we can start to fine tune that on an individual basis. So obviously with such a big group, I can't say for each person what that is, but certainly I'm happy to provide you with some guidance if you want to contact me afterwards.
Okay, last question.
Okay.
So you've talked a lot about strategies that are more like coins that you're putting in the piggy bank. And I think that a lot of those same strategies can have an immediate benefit as well. I think when people think about stress, it's not yet conceptually understood that you have to do things today to prepare for those future stresses, like making the right dietary choices to prep your brain to be in the best state and have the best environment for your brain. if there's anything you could leave the audience with, our poor stressed minds right now, something we could all do to have an instantaneous impact. A lot of the things, again, you've talked about like gratitude. Is there something, though, that's kind of ubiquitous to most stressful situations that could be guaranteed to have a pretty instantaneous impact to someone's brain?
As you're talking, I'm going through all these ideas. Do I want to say this? Do I want to say this? And there's just one that I won't get stressed. No, I'm really excited, actually, if you can't tell. They look the same, excitement and stress sometimes. I would actually say from my own experience, and I know I've mentioned this a couple of times, it has to be humor. Humor is such a wonderful tool, and I do 5 things every morning. I call it my high 5. It's how I jumpstart my brain, and it's movement. I do meditation, I do mindfulness, I think about my motivation for the day, and the last thing I do is mirth, which is actually humor. I seek out funny things to put into my brain because humor has this beautiful cognitive effect of rebalancing brain chemistry, of helping us to have a different perspective on life. And obviously humor is very individual, so what you find funny, maybe someone else doesn't, but one of my mentors and best friends taught me something very important about humor. She said, it's not about being funny, it's about seeing funny. And I loved that because really it's about being able to look at the world around us and just take it a little bit more lightly and just have more fun with it. And I think really at the core of a lot of our issues, if we had more fun and didn't take things quite so serious, or maybe take it serious with fun, right? We can combine those things. Our brains would work better, we'd be healthier, we'd be happier, and we'd just get along better too. I don't know. That's it for me, it's humor. Have more fun. Which is why I like hanging out with you guys so much.
We love you too, Heidi.
So I'm wonderful. We end up with the topic of serious fun. So first of all, thank you all for being here today. Thank you for those of you who are listening in. For those of you who are planning to attend next month, we are changing locations, so be very, very careful when you get the invitation. We will be inviting you to a different place. So just a heads up. So let's use our normal process of saying thank you to Heidi for a wonderful presentation. Thanks. We'll wait for... Okay.